Well, UCLA already took Donovan Dent after New Mexico beat them last year. Why not take their head coach, Jason Eck? He's already talking trash.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each every day. It's free wherever it's your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Welcome back, every dayers. We're joined once again by Sean Reider. He was there at the game, covering the game for the New Mexico's perspective from the Albuquerque Journal. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So, Sean, I'm pretty sure we were both shocked to see the final result. Everybody was shocked, and that led to the immediate firing, if you will, for DeShaun Foster. And we're going to do this like a laundry list of series for me. Coaching hires. Now, this could very well be on the low part of the totem pole for UCLA recruiting for a coach, but Jason Eck is an up-and-coming guy. How long do you see him at New Mexico if he's blasting UCLA on the field and in the post-game presser?
Yeah, and it was interesting, right? We talked about a little bit like off air as well. It's like it wasn't like they were like particularly mean shots at UCLA. Like what he had a quote where he said like we're gonna play better teams than UCLA this year, and that was from a question that I asked about, hey, what'd you think of the passing game tonight? Like, I know you want to get the passing game better, but in terms of the contractual stuff, he has a $4 million buyout. After contract year 1, a $2 million buyout in contract year 2, and that's down to $750,000 in year 3. All of those should be relatively manageable for P4 schools. I don't know UCLA's exact kind of if we're talking about them as a UCLA candidate, I don't know UCLA's exact financials. I know they're not awesome from kind of what I've seen, but that's just like social media pick and choose and all that. But look, I think Eck is a guy that I think fans now would want him to stay as long as he possibly could. He has not kind of come out and said like Bronco Mendenhall in the past that, hey, I want to finish my career here and stuff like that. They're just very much at different stages of their careers. But I do think he is a guy that wants to be a P4 head coach at some point. He's a guy that likes being a head coach. He has said he doesn't want to be a P4 coordinator if he doesn't have to. Like he's a Wisconsin guy, and there was that Wisconsin OC job was open, and he told me at one point that he had some people kind of close to him saying, "Why don't you go after that job?" And he's like, "Well, if I go after that job, like everybody else on my staff, like I'm going to leave them in the lurch." And he's like, "I don't want to do that." So I do think he wants to be a P4 head coach, and I think with a win like this, his time at UNM is probably more limited than anybody the fans would probably like to hope, but. No, I think honestly it would be probably fair to expect him to maybe get a hard look if success continues and there aren't any other issues to get a good hard look and some and maybe some intriguing offers in the next year or two. So
it's always a tough balance between you see him have success at Idaho and then he comes to Mexico and you see those guys that make splashes, and sometimes you get the schedule where you get that Mountain West team, you get in New Mexico, that wasn't in the worst spot after last year, but he brings in his own quarterback, brings in his own stuff, and then you get kind of a wounded UCLA where they're at with the program, and you can make a splash, right? You come on, you are impressive against Michigan in a loss. They survive against Idaho State, if you will, and they beat UCLA. Any of those things go wrong, you're not the hot candidate, but you get that in the right direction. All of a sudden, he's the guy that just the gregariousness of his personality, everything. That's the type of guy you want. But you go from success to 1 year success. You almost want to see it happen 2 years in a row. The difference between Bronco Mendenhall, we've seen it before. But Eck, you want to see like almost 2 years of sustained success. And then he could leap to almost any job possible. What would you think his strength is as a coach? Is it personality, connection with the staff? What do you think from what you've seen is like kind of the strengths and maybe some weaknesses?
Oh, I think it is his personality. You hit the nail on the head right there, Gregarious. He has a big dynamic personality. He is self-deprecating. He can be funny. He is a guy that can motivate his guys. He is very much if you are a fan, it will not take you it won't take you long to root for the guy and really like the guy. He's not a guy that's going to hide from the fans. He's not a guy that's going to hide from the media, anything like that. I do think that is a massive strength, and I do like that you brought up the kind of you got the schedule and all that. Maybe you want to see it further. I think that might actually be a bit of a case for him, right? For him as a head coach at the G5 level before, if he was going to move up to the P4 level, because the one thing that you can kind of knock on his resume is that he's kind of an anomaly in the sense that there's so many FCS guys, guys that came up that were head coaches at the FCS ranks, like Jeff Cho and Matt Entz. Matt Entz, crosstown of USC, that had to go take essentially coordinator jobs, or in Ent's case, kind of a linebackers coach or / head coach of the defense. I think that was kind of the role that he had. That kind of deal at a P4 program to really kind of make them put themselves, in a good spot to get a G5 job in the first place. And Eck doesn't have that P4 experience outside of being a GA at Wisconsin and Colorado in the early 2000s. So I am curious if that is something that people are going to, administrators and all that, if they are going to look at him as a coaching candidate. And I think he'll get a fair shake in this cycle. I don't know if he'll get fired out of this cycle. If that's something that that kind of scares them away a little bit, or maybe gives them a little bit more pause. And hey, he did 3 years in Indiana as the tight ends coach or the offensive coordinator or whatever. So I think that's something to kind of think about as well with his profile.
And the thing is, sometimes you want to strike while the iron is hot. Is this when he's going to be his most coveted if they have a strong finish? We can discuss that a little more later about his schedule. But is this where he's going to be the most coveted? Sometimes you see coach jump from job to job, and you don't always necessarily want to see that. I don't think Eck has proven that, because we've seen like a Kalen DeBoer, who will be a name that'll be thrown into UCLA's coaching search if Alabama decides to move on at some point later this season, if that's how it plays out. But he went from Fresno State, Washington, Alabama. And you kind of want that guy to stay 1 to 2 years. Now, if he stays 2 years in New Mexico, that completely pulls him out of this UCLA coaching search. But you kind of want guys who are loyal, stay, and the UCLA job is one that's not going to be won overnight. So, and I think X got that personality to help bring that out. But that's kind of, do you jump right now and take that job, or prove it by 1 to 2 years of sustained success? And hey, it's not like he won the big title at Idaho, but of course, every title is won by somebody in North or South Dakota at the FCS level at this point. So you can't knock him for not winning a national championship, but he does have the DNA, but not the resume. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do think that stuff with the kind of the loyalty and are coaches jumping too much and that kind of deal. I think that is always kind of tough to pinpoint, and I think you kind of you need to know the guy a little better to do that, right? I think he's a guy that wants to be a P4 head coach at some point. I don't know if he's getting paid pretty well at New Mexico, and I know P4 compensation is a whole other level. I don't know how much that would factor into his decision making, and I don't know. He's a guy with 5 kids, and one of them plays for him as well. I don't know if he would want to finish out. His son Jason Eck, linebacker, had a nice game against UCLA. I don't know if that's a situation where he would want. We've already moved Jackson so many times, right? Playing in high school and all that too. I don't know if it would, if they'd want him to, finish his career at New Mexico, or hey, you know what, we're gonna go take this P4 job, and we're gonna bring you along, and we're gonna see what happens. So those are kind of things that are just strictly speculation right now, but I think they're things that you just kind of think about, at least on my end, when you're thinking about the possibility of a guy leaving and all that too. So.
Yeah, and that's something we don't really talk about, whether it's just Coach Eck or anybody. Their family, sometimes coaches are like, all right, they have, a child and they're almost done with high school. It's like, all right, their oldest, get him to college, and then we can move the younger one and they can get established with the new middle school. Or maybe they want to get the youngest one through, and then they'll make that move in 3 years where they're comfortable, they've built something, and then it's time to go. Those are things that, as much as the financials, the structure and the support are important, the family aspect too, like, is his son ready to go play at the Power 4 level on a week-in basis? Now, the way New Mexico trounced UCLA, you could say probably absolutely. But, sometimes you're like, hey, what's the best course of success for my son in his playing career versus what's my coaching career? And him taking an extra in New Mexico is certainly not a bad move at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think Eck is a guy, and I think he's kind of given off this vibe to anybody that's ever been around him or really watched him, or him in his press conference or on the sidelines or whatever, at any extent. Like he's a guy with a certain degree of confidence, man. And I think I don't know if he would look at this coaching cycle if it wasn't the absolute like perfect job in his eyes. And I don't know what that would be. I don't know if he would look at, a P4 opportunity that maybe isn't perfect in his eyes and say, you know what, this is probably the only P4 opportunity I'm ever going to get. I think I'm going to pull the trigger here. I don't think that would probably be his approach, frankly. So I would lean, he would probably have a more measured take, but I don't know. Maybe he thinks UCLA is a job that, hey, we could flip this. We could do this. This speaks to me. Virginia Tech opened up too, and all that as well. So we'll see. It'll be interesting, man.
Well, we'll see for sure, but we're going to go back in time and kind of flash back once again, UCLA, New Mexico, and see what was right, what was wrong about our predictions. Me, very wrong. Sean was very on point about who was going to dominate, but we didn't expect it to be a 25-point blowout. So we'll talk about that next as we review that game one last time and then bury it for good for UCLA's fans' perspective for the New Mexico game. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. Quick, easy, and honestly, it's my favorite way to follow along with football. And hey, the best part is, even if one of your pick misses, then hey, check out Prize Picks because it's invented to flex play so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege in $50 after you get your first $5 play. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. I promise. It's the final time I'll mention it ever. Maybe. UCLA, New Mexico. It was a head scratcher, one you pulled out your hair if you're a UCLA fan. Stunned myself, Sean. Were you pretty stunned with how the events unfolded Friday night in the Rose Bowl with utter domination by the Lobos?
I was not stunned that they took a 14-0 lead to start. That didn't really surprise me, given UCLA's track record of kind of struggling, to start games offensively and all that, and knowing that this wasn't the cleanest defensive operation for UCLA. But I did think there was a real – and I honestly thought, considering what UNM's aggressiveness with a couple of those 4th and shorts within the 5 and all that, I thought at least one of those was going to backfire, and they were going to have to really kind of pay for it, especially after Michael Buckley's muff punt on all that too. And I was really surprised that UCLA just never made him pay for it by any stretch. I was really surprised at some of the use of play calling. I don't mean to rub salt in the wound for any UCLA fans listening to this. It was just kind of like, wow, I didn't think that was going to happen. But the biggest surprise to me was how good UNM's lines were, frankly, on both sides of the ball. Against Michigan, and I know Michigan is built to do this, UNM really struggled to run the ball. I mean, they stuffed them up front. I think they held them just 50 yards rushing in the big house. And, they also struggled to protect quarterback Jack Lane to a certain degree. And I thought we kind of touched on the last time I was on the show. It's like it is, I think, probably a bit more of an advantage for UCLA that Lane is more of a prototypical, pocket passer. And he's not a guy that's going to go out and break runs and all that like Devin Dampier or Anthony Colandrea. And that should be something that, some UCLA fans should kind of take some solace in. Okay, like this won't go like the last time. And Lane was incredibly efficient. He was, I think, 12 for 16. I mean, he really had his sharpest game as the Lobos to this point. Made some really good decisions. Didn't kind of blow you away, but I mean, he did exactly everything you kind of need in that spot. And a big part of that was the offensive line. I think they allowed per PFF just 1 quarterback pressure, which was not a number I was expected to see at the end of the night. On the flip side, I talked about a little bit about how UNM's defensive line. To me, this is the best I have seen in my time covering UNM, and they kind of delivered on that. Didn't have any sacks, but had 28 quarterback pressures per PFF.
Again, wait, say that again. You said 28 quarterback pressures.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
And for UCLA fans in context, like UNM has been a very bad pass rushing team over the last couple of years. And this is a completely different group than the ones that they've had. Like, so you can kind of do it what you will if you do if that what you will. But that is the most quarterback pressures in a single game for UNM since they beat Fresno State on December 12th in 2020. And that was when Kalen DeBoer was still coaching Fresno State. I think that was his first year. That was one of 2 wins UNM got that year, and it was kind of a weird, fluky game. They played in Vegas. It was all, COVID, all that. So yeah, and that really surprised me. I knew that both units were pretty good. I leaned that the defensive line would, could have a big night. I did not think it was going to happen that way, and I thought I honestly thought Nico was going to give them more problems. Just on the run with his legs and all that. And they did a pretty good job containing him, man. I mean, there was a couple points where he kind of ripped a couple throws, and I was like, wow, like that's awesome. But he really did not hurt them on the run. They did a pretty great job containing them. So, and of course, that all led to, a situation where when a guy like Damon Bankston gets a screen pass and he's kind of reading the linebacker and he reads it correctly and he's not tackled, okay, there you go. It's 28-10, and all of a sudden it's, the score is kind of reflecting a little bit of what we had seen in the previous couple quarters. So surprising result, impressive one for UNM in a lot of respects, and for UCLA, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've already got into it on this show, so I won't push further on that.
It's interesting because it's like, wait, all right, Lane didn't dominate, but he did what he needed to do, and then UNM dominated, but they certainly made their mistakes to allow a team like UCLA back in the game. And I think even the frustrating part, the part that got DeShaun fired, is that they weren't even competitive after those mistakes. They didn't make them pay. The end of the first half was very, very, very questionable. And then when, a little screen pass down the sideline, you tackle them once or twice, either they go for it or at some point you punt it. And instead, not only does he break the tackles and get a first down, he ran all the way for a touchdown, which just kind of almost seemed like the nail in the coffin to DeShaun Foster's UCLA coaching group. That moment right there, I think, kind of encapsulated it all. We're like, oh, this is embarrassment to the next level. And then they still scored another touchdown to really rub it in and drive home Jason Eck's point of, we're going to play better Power 4 teams. We want to challenge, the Ohio States of the world, like the question you asked him, and he just kind of flipped it about what his expectation is, which makes him an attractive option for head coach, but also is really not a slap in the face, but that's hard to swallow if you're UCLA, and that's why they made the move. Because if Lane is not a mobile quarterback, and all they did was go run up the middle and go kind of inside zone for 300 yards, that can't happen at UCLA. You can't just have a team do that, whether it's New Mexico or not. A team just does that. That just means you're not physical enough. The line's not good enough, and that's embarrassment, especially when Bankston comes in for 10 yards a carry. Average-wise, that's insane numbers against the UCLA line that has proven they were not good so far through the first 3 games.
Yeah, and look, I think I looked it up. I'm not a huge fan of PFF's rushing direction, because I don't think it accounts for how every run scheme kind of works and all that. But if you go off that, I think it's 241 of 298 yards were between the tackles. And particularly if you watch the game, they're running to the left a whole lot. The runs were breaking to the left, whether that was gap scheme or kind of the mid zone they like to run. They don't run a ton of inside zone, but they kind of do more mid zone that ends up looking a little bit like inside zone and all that sometimes. And look, it was you touched on Lane there too. It's not like Lane had to have a massive night, right? It wasn't against Michigan where they took away the run. They said we want this guy to throw. We want him to beat us throwing the ball, and they couldn't do that night. It just wasn't the pieces in place there for that to happen. And he ended up throwing 3 interceptions. He took 9 quarterback hits, if I remember correctly, actually, and kind of got battered. And that just did not happen against UCLA, man. So again, it's a good look for UNM. It's not a great one for UCLA.
And the final point on this one, UNM went to their bag of tricks early. They went the double pass. And if the dude saw the pass, he would have caught a touchdown after it doinked off the top of his helmet. But then they realized, wait a minute, them going for it on 4th down wasn't like we had to. It's like they can't stop us when they went for it so many times. It was like, why kick it? Why even put that in the atmosphere, put that out there? We can just go and they're not going to stop us. And it took them literally dropping the ball a couple of times to only hurt themselves because UCLA was not stopping them. And I think that's the biggest exclamation that New Mexico's like, we really don't need to punt or kick a field goal here. We're going to keep going, and we're going to make you stop us. And UCLA for the entirety of the night did not. And that is really what led to the end of DeShaun Foster's coaching tenure after 15 games, because that just can't happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. And and truly, again, I'll say it a million times. I wrote it a couple times already. I've been on other shows and talked about it. I truly thought after the Michael Buckley muff punt, that was going to be kind of the, okay, you fumbled the 4th and short. You got the stop, but now it's like you're going to have to pay for this, like you are, because Buckley was not comfortable, did not look comfortable catching bunts all night. And it finally bit them in that moment, and I thought that was going to be it. And they made him settle for what, a 51-yard field goal? Like that's if that's
when it was like false start, and they just went backwards from like a 2nd and 4. You're like, what are you doing? That
the
was
back to back. Because what it was like, that's 100.
The receiver wasn't even set. Yeah.
Something. That's dreadful. Gosh, I forgot about the penalties in that.
It was 2nd and short, and then like back, and then Nico was literally about to be sacked and almost threw it and had a chance to maybe get a guy open down the field and made a play to not get sacked just to keep the field goal alive. But I mean, that just kind of all those sequences, you have to make teams pay for more than just a 51-yarder, where in reality they looked worse than, him fielding punts. And that's rough. That's pretty rough. We're going to talk next, though, about what are we projecting both UCLA and New Mexico going forward. Is this the cycle where they can kind of run the table and that puts themselves in that, let's get hired to the next job? Or is it a slow build because Idaho State is not a good FCS team, and let's face it, UCLA is not a good FBS team. So are they, not the best to win? It's kind of like UNLV. We'll talk about that next for Locked On UCLA. College football is back. It's more than back. It's here, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkouts. What is this nonsense? That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans, you and I, which makes it the easiest way to score the last-minute tickets at the best prices, no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You know how many times I've gone to these apps and you're like, why is it $5, $10, $20 more? No, what you see is what you pay. So you can make the fair comparison. You see amazing deals, whether it's going to the Rose Bowl, any other college football venues, tickets as low as $25 or even lower. That's why you go to Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right. Well, it's going to be a fun end of show because we're projecting UCLA and New Mexico. Obviously, New Mexico will have a far superior record than UCLA in this 2025 season. I don't think that's hard to say anymore. But let's kind of go between both teams and see what's going to happen. And, for fun's sake, let's talk about New Mexico first, Sean. You've got New Mexico State, big rivalry matchup coming up. That's at home in Albuquerque. And then you get into the depths of Mountain West play. So what do you think that kind of game against the Aggies looks like coming up from a brief standpoint? And how do you think, from what this team showcased so far, they can perform in the Mountain West, where there's been a couple of P4 victories, both against UCLA from UNLV and UNM? What do you think so far about the Lobos?
Yeah, the New Mexico State game is September 27th. So that is in 2 weeks. UNM has their first bye this week and all that too. That is a huge game. It always is a very big game. Obviously because of the rivalry component. And also the fact that, yes, they beat UCLA. Yes, fans are excited. As we have seen in the past at UNM, if you don't win the New Mexico State game, because it's always earlier in the schedule, it's always kind of in the first third of the schedule, that is just how you lose a lot of fans. A lot of fans just kind of check out because of that. And that just kind of sets up, some dwindling crowds and attendance throughout the rest of the season, all that. But if you win the New Mexico State game, you are all of a sudden you're 3-1. A bowl is very, very, very attainable. It would be the program's first bowl since 2016. the UCLA game to me, more than any New Mexico State win, like has changed the tone of how we're talking about this season. With the schedule after New Mexico State, say they do beat New Mexico State, although I do think New Mexico State's pretty decent. I was surprised at what happened on Saturday night when they lost to La Tech. But you're going to play at San Jose State and at Boise State after, host Nevada and Utah State back-to-back. You go to Vegas, play UNLV, and you go back to home, and you go back to Albuquerque and play Colorado State, and then you're at Air Force, and you're wrapping the season for San Diego State. I think if all of the games I'm looking at with this schedule, if UNM wins all of the games that they should be favored in, they should be 7-5. And that's if they don't win a game on the road and stuff like that. I'm assuming they're not going to be favored at San Jose State, Boise State, UNLV. Air Force, maybe we'll see what happens. I do think Air Force is pretty good this year, honestly, although they just did not have a great result against Utah State on Saturday. You should be 7-5. If you drop one, then you're 6-6, right? One of those games that you're favored in, which either would be a resounding, incredible success for UNM. And I think anything more than 6-6 would probably surpass some of the expectations that this coaching staff has kind of set and kind of said. Jason Eck has said, look, we want to be better than we were last year. And they were 5-7 last year. So, 6-6 would be kind of reaching that goal. I do think it's crazy to think about it. I mean, and we might be getting ahead of ourselves with the UCLA stuff too. But I mean, I do think like 8 wins are in play. I don't know where they will steal a road game.
UNLV hasn't proven that they can play a lot of defense. I mean, they give a lot of yards to Idaho State. UCLA couldn't score against New Mexico. They couldn't score against Utah, but they did score against UNLV. So I think that could be one that they steal. That's a fun matchup, at least for me, to see which of the teams that beat UCLA is better. But
exactly, and that's Sam Houston State. That's a bad Sam Houston State was putting up points on UNLV too. I do think that's an interesting proposition. San Jose State, I think is pretty interesting too. Just not what I was really expecting this season, man. And then Boise State, I think for the fans would be the biggest one. UNM has only ever beat Boise State once. That was 2015. That was 10 years ago. And, it's the last year of the Mountain West as we know it. I'm sure fans would absolutely love going up to the Blue and winning one more time, kind of sending them on their way. I do think Boise State's pretty good. I think we probably overreacted a little bit to the South Florida result and all that. But, no, I think there's some good opportunities in the schedule. And the Utah State game is also huge as well. Bronco Mendenhall has returned to Albuquerque too. So
is that going to be the biggest game left on the schedule, or is that the one? Will that have more energy than the New Mexico State game?
I don't know if it'll have more energy than the New Mexico State game. That's an interesting question, honestly. I don't know if it will have more. I would still lean New Mexico State. I think in a normal UNM year where it's, more often than not, probably kind of mediocre football and dismal stuff where, fan interest is kind of dwindling, all of that, that would be the biggest game. I think for fans, the beauty of this UNM team is that, hey, like you are 2-1. You just beat UCLA. Like you actually have an on-field product that like you can be really interested in and all that too. And I think, with all that in mind, if they play the way they probably should play down the stretch and they beat, who they probably should beat down the stretch, who we think they should beat, then that UNLV game is the biggest game remaining on the schedule and all that. Or that Colorado State game is really interesting too. So I think the beauty here is that they gave it a little bit more flexibility than fans might be accustomed to at this point.
Yeah, that's a lot of hope for the Lobos, but for UCLA, the hope is that they get a win, because the thought was, especially my perspective, you come in and I think, no disrespect, but the idea is, especially as a powerful program, you go to UNLV, you win. You host New Mexico, you win. You play Northwestern, and you're 3-1. Like that's the thought. That's the thought process. That's the schedule that you dream of. And then you've got some 50-50 games with Michigan State on the road. You never knew what Indiana was going to be after the playoff. You host Maryland with obviously Penn State higher up there. And you thought, okay, this could be a team that could, if they play well, trend towards a season better than last year. Well, unfortunately, the talent was not there in the line, and they're 0-3. And it's not like last year's, team when we went 1-5. You're playing Penn State on the road, LSU on the road. You're hosting an Indiana team that made the playoff. That's why this team was so frustrating. So the real question is, can they get 1 or 2 wins for this UCLA team? And the most important thing is with their new interim coach, Tim Skipper, he has 2 weeks with the bye week now, just like UNM does, to play Northwestern. Do you think there's a world where UCLA gets their first win against Northwestern in 2 weeks? Are they winless? Can they get multiple wins? What is your thought from seeing them at the Rose Bowl Friday night?
I think there is a win. I think there's a world in which they can get multiple wins. I say that as a guy that went to Michigan State, and it's not. Yeah, I know they're playing on the road. It's not supremely blown away by what Michigan State has done so far. Although the Boston College game was pretty nice. I don't know, man. I do think there is also a good chance that they beat Northwestern, and I think there's a world in which they can beat Northwestern. If they don't, beat Northwestern, I completely understand all fans kind of checking out at that point. But I also think Maryland at home is kind of that's kind of an interesting proposition too. So I don't know. I think it's really hard at this point in a lot of respects in college football, and I think it's always been kind of hard to go the perfect 0 for 12 and all that as well. And certainly, if UCLA does not get a win at a certain point, that closing stretch of Nebraska and Washington and Ohio State and USC, like that's really daunting stuff, man. That might just finish the job there. But it's college football, man. You never know. We were not expecting UNM to win by 25 points, right? So yeah, we'll see.
I mean, it takes, and then there's always the new energy you bring in with an interim skipper, if you will, literally, with Tim Skipper coming in, that can bring new energy. And of course, with DeShaun Foster being fired, at some point you wonder, the players, does that like drum up some embarrassment? What does that kind of drive them? Does that drive them for individual goals to the portal? Does that drive them for team chemistry and camaraderie? Because some guys either are going to stay or they're going to go, or, just for sheer pride, like, well, we got embarrassed by New Mexico. Like, the next game should be the hardest hitting, most electrified practice and game like scenario that you play for just sheer pride. Because, sometimes you play the team, you're like, dude, that was bad. No matter who you play next, it should be the next best effort. Even if they're not the most talented, we should see a lot more effort, which is not what we truly saw at points against New Mexico in that game. Like UNLV, you saw the fight. Against New Mexico, they weren't really fighting. It just felt like Bankston ran up the sideline. You're like, what just happened here? Like, anybody could have just tackled the guy and nothing happened. So there is a world where they can get 2 wins. I would think Maryland and Northwestern are prime opportunities for that. I think kind of out of the door is any opportunity for a big upset, although that would just that's what makes college football beautiful. Sometimes you see something truly unexpected, but I think Maryland, that's the chance to get it, but Northwestern is certainly a winnable game. So would you go over 2.5 wins for the rest of the year, or is that pushing it?
Oh, that might be pushing it, honestly. The one thing I will say, Tim Skipper was the acting head coach at Fresno State, obviously in the Mountain West with UNM, while Jeff Tedford was dealing with some health issues. He coached in the New Mexico Bowl and led them to a pretty resounding win over a 10-win New Mexico State team. I talked with Skipper before, and I get why guys play hard for Tim Skipper, man. Like, I totally get it. And, he was given that kind of shot last year, that weird acting head coach deal with Fresno. Didn't end up, working out, and they went and hired Matt Hentz anyways. But and Skipper's a guy that's been in the spot, man, before. Not only at Fresno State, he was the acting head coach, I think, at Central Michigan as well. So I do think he will find a way to get the most out of guys. Maybe if it's only for 2 games, frankly, and all that. Maybe if it's only Northwestern and Maryland, and maybe if it is kind of not a huge upset, but like a Michigan State or something like that. But I do think there is a world where he can make that happen. Certainly there's talent here, right? But at the same time, I don't know. I would probably go under the 2.5 and probably sit 1-2 wins and kind of go from there.
Yeah, we can't be too picky or choosy if UCLA gets a win. We got to avoid the offer and then see what happens from there. Anything else is kind of a blessing if they can get 1 to 2 wins. But yeah, 2.5, I think in my mind, is kind of pushing it. So I would agree with you there, Sean. But Sean Reider covers New Mexico, indirectly got that pretty famous quote now from Jason Eck about Power 4 teams, even though he's asking about the passing game, and he decided to take a shot at UCLA and their inability to be a good Power 4 team. Sean, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me on, man. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It's a pleasure. Apparently it wasn't a pleasure for New Mexico to play UCLA, though. That was a little rough. But thanks for tuning in this episode of Locked On UCLA. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer, signing off saying, go Bruins.